Chapter 1. The Woman Who Shrunk Herself. He said I'd never find anyone better than him. The crowd laughed and I smiled like a well-trained accessory while my heart broke under champagne lights. 3 days later, I found a hotel receipt under his suit jacket, Hyatt Bellevue room for two. I didn't scream. I cut my hair, took off my ring, and decided silence would be my loudest revenge. My name is Lauren Hale, and this is how I left him with nothing but the echo of what my absence sounded like. I used to think quiet was proof of a happy home. The house stayed tidy, the dinner reservations were always confirmed, and Ethan liked to say that stability was the gift he gave me. Every morning I moved through a schedule that fit him perfectly. The coffee was strong, the shirts were pressed, and my opinions were ironed just as flat. Somewhere along the way, I became an accessory to my own life placed on a shelf he approved of polished when company came over and forgotten when the door closed. Seattle in late September smells like rain on warm pavement. Our neighborhood had those manicured streets where the leaves turn first and people take pictures of their dogs with lattes. The house was a case study for a glossy magazine, clean lines and soft oak and light that fell exactly where I had planned it to. I had designed it before I stopped being a designer. The last day I walked out of Harper & Co. Design, Ethan kissed my forehead and told me I did not need to be tired all the time. He said he made enough for both of us. I said I was fine. He said it would be better for our marriage. I folded my portfolio and put it in a drawer and told myself love required compromises. 8 years later, I could feel how small I had become. I chose the pasta he liked and learned to like it. I ordered salmon when he ordered steak because someone should be the light choice. I wore my hair long because he said it softened my face. The mirror in our primary bathroom was expensive and unforgiving. When I looked into it, I could name every finish in the room and not a single part of myself. His birthday fell on a Friday. Downtown glowed like a postcard. A rooftop bar had held the reservation for weeks, private area champagne on ice, the skyline framed behind a circle of friends who knew Ethan as a man who always landed on his feet. I greeted people by name, hugged the wives I saw at holiday parties, thanked the host when the candles arrived. Seattle looked kind that night. The water was black glass. The buildings sparkled as if cheering us on. It began as harmless laughter. Ethan had that loud relief in his voice that comes with expensive scotch and attention. A colleague ribbed him about getting older. He grinned and put an arm around my shoulders. She will never find anyone better than me. It came out easy like a punchline he had been polishing. The table erupted. Someone clinked a glass. Someone else said that I was lucky. I felt my mouth shape a smile because a good wife is a hostess even when she is a prop. The air thinned around me. I heard a woman ask where my dress was from, and I heard myself answer, and I watched my hands find a napkin to fold and unfold, because they needed something to do. I learned in that moment that humiliation is not loud, it is quiet and neat, and sits beside you while you decide whether to make a scene. I did not make a scene. I passed the cake plates and thanked the server and said we were having a wonderful time, after the elevator carried us down in mirrored silence. He leaned against the wall and said I was being sensitive. He said I always took things too far. I told him that what he said hurt. He said people knew he was joking. He said I was missing the point. I looked at the reflection of us standing side by side and tried to locate the person who would know how to answer. I could not find her. I said I was tired. He said I always said that. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped forward because the doors were not going to wait for me to gather my pride. At home, the house looked the way it always looked after a party, as if the night had barely happened. He went to bed. I quietly gathered the rental glassware into a bin near the back door for morning pickup. I wiped the counters. When I finally walked into our closet to change, I did not cry. My body had learned how to hold tears in the same way it learned to hold opinions. The next morning was Saturday. Ethan went for a run he liked to call clearing his head. I stripped the bed and took the laundry down the back stairs. I cleaned by habit. Shirts turned right side out, socks mated towels folded on the machine as if lining up came easily to everything in this house. His suit jacket hung heavier than usual. I reached into the inside pocket to check for receipts because I had ruined a load once with an ink stain and I did not need another small disaster. The paper slid against my fingers. The logo was crisp blue. Hyatt Bellevue, a room with a king bed. The date was 3 days earlier, 2 guests. I felt a strange stillness pass over me, a cold layer of knowing that somehow did not surprise. My body refused to shake. I folded the receipt back to its original crease and laid it on the machine. I could hear a neighbor's sprinkler start on the other side of the fence. Water ticking at regular intervals sounded like a metronome for the end of an illusion. I told myself there could be an explanation better than the obvious one, even as another part of me asked why I insisted on being so generous. I carried the laundry upstairs, set his jacket aside, and placed the receipt in the kitchen drawer where we kept paper clips and rubber bands and batteries that might still work. It sat there like a witness ordinary among the tools that kept daily life stitched together. His phone lit up on the island with that quick blue light that announces someone is thinking of you. The preview line was short and bright. Can't wait for Portland next week, followed by an initial S. People think discovery is dramatic. In my kitchen, it felt boring. Portland had come up in recent days in the way he spoke about work. He said the firm was exploring a new project there. He said he might be in and out. He said I should enjoy some time for myself. He said many things that could be true and untrue at once. I did not touch his phone. I did not scroll. I rinsed a coffee mug and placed it in the rack and watched one drop cling to the rim and fall. I moved through the house doing weekend things with the dull precision of a nurse in an empty ward. When he came back flushed and satisfied with his speed, he mentioned a business flight the following week. He asked what I wanted to do for dinner. He did not ask if I felt small. In the afternoon, I drove alone to a salon I liked years ago. I did not make an appointment. The receptionist looked at the length of my hair and said I might have to wait. I said I could. I sat by the window and watched the street until a stylist called my name. I said I was thinking of going shorter. He asked how short. I told him I wanted to look like someone who makes her own choices. He laughed softly, like he understood something I had not said, and lifted the first section between his fingers and cut. The sound was clean, like a ribbon being trimmed. I watched pieces fall into my lap and onto the polished floor. With every inch that landed, I saw a year of my life return to me. He asked if I was sure, and I nodded. When he finished, the mirror offered me a woman whose eyes looked larger, whose neck looked honest, whose mouth looked like it belonged to her. He asked if I wanted to style it straight or with a slight wave. I said straight. It felt like the truth. Driving home, I did not feel brave. I felt awake. The sidewalks in our neighborhood were golden with leaves, and a father taught his little girl to ride a bike without training wheels. She wobbled and he ran beside her, and she did not know yet that falling is part of learning. I parked in the driveway and sat with the engine off, hands on the wheel, until the dashboard light dimmed. You cannot prepare for the moment your life splits into before and after. You can only decide how to walk through it. In our bedroom, I placed my wedding ring on the dresser. It left a small circle of untouched dust. The mark of absence is often more precise than the mark of presence. I stood facing the mirror and turned my head left and right and took in the sharpness of my own features. The ring looked pale and polite against the wood. I thought about the night he proposed in a restaurant on the water, and how the server clapped and how the other tables looked at us with that collective wish that life would always feel like this. I wanted to be the kind of person who still believed in permanent things. I also wanted to be someone who respected evidence. He noticed my hair at dinner. He said it was different. I said yes. He said he liked it long. I said I knew. He asked why I had not told him I was doing this. I said I wanted to try something new. He said new did not always mean better. I said not everything has to be better to be right. He chewed and stared at the television over my shoulder as if it had answers. That night I lay awake and mapped the rooms in my mind. I drew the kitchen in lines and noted the drawer with the receipt, and followed the stairs and stood in the closet where the jacket still hung and counted back to the last day I felt like I belonged to myself. It was a small exercise, and it kept me from reaching for the soft fix of hope. Hope is useful when it is connected to action. Hope without action is a lullaby you sing to keep from hearing your own heart crack. Sunday arrived with its list of chores. He left to meet someone from the office. I did what I do when I am trying to live. I went to the market for late peaches and small tomatoes. I bought a loaf of sourdough that still warmed the paper bag. I wandered the flower stall and picked stems that felt like me, things that are simple and stubborn and quiet. Back at the house, I cut them short and placed them in a low bowl on the dining table. The arrangement was imperfect and honest. By evening, I had a plan that did not look like a plan from the outside. It started with paying attention. The things he said, the emails he printed and left on the desk, the calendar reminders that blinked on his laptop in the room we called the office, but that I rarely entered. I did not need to dig. People tell you who they are when you stop rushing to fill the silence. The week moved the way weeks move when you are waiting for something you cannot name to happen. He mentioned Portland again. He said it was a busy stretch. I asked if he needed anything for the trip. He said he was all set. He kissed my cheek in that performative way that feels like checking a box. Later, after he fell asleep with the television painting pale light across the walls, I stood in the bathroom and looked at my reflection and tried to memorize the expression on my face. Not angry, not broken, not fully formed, a draft of a person I might still turn into. On Thursday, I put clean towels in the guest bathroom and changed the sheets on the bed as if preparing for a future that might not include this house. I found the folder where I had kept old business cards from clients who had once asked for me by name. I held my portfolio pages and ran a hand over the images and felt the muscle memory of purpose return. There is a particular quiet that happens right before you reclaim your life. It is not bravado. It is not vindictive. It is a narrowing into focus like a camera finding its subject. Friday afternoon, traffic crawled toward the lake. I drove to a park near our first apartment and sat on a bench with a coffee I did not really want. I let the past sit next to me and behave itself. I remembered a version of Ethan who waited in line at a food truck and insisted I take the first bite. I remembered my own laughter when my career began, and every lobby smelled like new carpet and opportunity. It is dangerous to remember only the good. It is also dangerous to remember only the bad. I tried to remember the whole. That night, he packed a carry-on. He said Portland first, then maybe a quick return through Bellevue. He said he would be in touch. I said safe travels. He left before dawn. The house exhaled. I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer and held the receipt again, not with shaking hands, but with steady ones. I set it on the counter beside my ring. Evidence and symbol, fact and choice. I did not text him. I did not call Sierra with a question I did not need to ask. I washed my face and tied back my newly short hair and looked at the woman in the mirror. I told her softly, without the crutch of sound, that I would not leave this marriage with a tantrum. I would leave it with a record. I would not run. I would walk. I would not throw a plate. I would set the table with what I knew and decide what to feed myself next. Outside, a neighbor watered potted herbs and asked how our week had been. I said busy. The mint smelled sharp and clean. I went back inside and stood in the doorway of every room I had designed and let my eyes rest on the details. The chair rail in the dining room, the curve of the banister where my hand always hesitated on the third step. The afternoon light in the office I never used. I saw the truth that had been there the whole time. I had made this house beautiful. I could make a life again. When I finally turned off the kitchen light, the ring on the counter caught a last glint and went dark. I did not cry. I did not rehearse a speech. I let the quiet gather around me like a well-earned coat, and I carried it upstairs. I lay down in a bed that felt both familiar and foreign, and I listened to the clock in the hall and to my own measured breath. He said I would never find anyone better. Maybe he was right about something without knowing it. Maybe better was never a person. Maybe better was the moment you stop apologizing for taking up space. I slept with my hand open on the pillow and woke before dawn certain of one thing. I would not leave him with tears. I would leave him with silence that taught him what my absence sounded like. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you, Chapter 2. When everything fell in silence. Morning made the house look cleaner than it was. I brewed coffee and watched the steam climb, then poured it down the sink. The silence felt purposeful now, like a tool I finally knew how to use. I sat at the kitchen island with a legal pad and wrote 3 headings in neat block letters. Bank, housing, work. Under bank, I wrote Harper Lynn and circled it twice. Harper picked up on the second ring. Her voice carried the calm of someone who has seen many storms and knows which windows to seal first. She asked if I was alone. I said yes. She asked if I was ready to act like a person who mattered to herself. I said I would try. She told me to open a separate checking account at a different bank that morning, to order a new card sent to a secure mailing address, and to stop using the joint account except for utilities that were in both names. She said to gather statements and receipts that belonged to me or to the household. and to take photos of them in the light by the window, so nothing looked shadowed or suspicious. She offered to meet me at a branch near Capitol Hill if I wanted moral support. I said yes. I changed into jeans and a sweater that I did not remember buying for anyone but me. I placed my wedding ring in a small linen pouch and tucked it in a drawer. I left the house without a note. The air had the September chill that makes a city look honest. At the bank, Harper was waiting on a bench with a folder on her lap and a pair of reading glasses she never actually needed. She stood and hugged me the way you hug a person who is trying not to come apart. We sat with a banker who had a tidy haircut and a habit of lining pens in a straight row. Harper spoke in that clean, non-judgmental way that makes institutions behave. She said we were setting up a separate account in my name direct deposit to follow debit card mailed to my friend's office online, access enabled today. She asked him to print a provisional card I could use for essentials. He nodded and typed. I signed where he pointed. He slid me a folder with temporary checks and said welcome in a tone that made me feel like I actually was. Outside, Harper handed me a new legal pad. She said write everything down in ink and back it up with photos because memory gets slippery during stress. She suggested I forward household bills to my personal email and set passwords that were mine. She said if I could stomach it, we should download the last year of joint statements that afternoon while Ethan was in meetings. I said I could. She held my gaze and told me I was not the first woman to sit at a bank and do this and would not be the last, and that no one is brave before they begin. They are only brave while doing it. At home, I opened my laptop in the room we called the office and hovered over the joint account login. My hand did not shake. I downloaded statements month by month and saved them to a thumb drive labeled with a name that meant nothing. Harper stayed on speakerphone and told me to breathe through the spikes of adrenaline. We flagged transfers that looked like siphons. There were several. Large amounts moved from the joint account to Ward Urban Developments within hours of deposits. Harper hummed the way lawyers hum when puzzle pieces show their edges. She said we would keep a neutral record and not draw conclusions in writing, and that if anything escalated, we would be ready. In the late afternoon, Ethan texted that he would be home late. Work Portland prep. I responded with a simple understood. He added a thumbs up emoji that looked like a sticker on a cracked window. I placed the thumb drive in a small envelope and slid it into my purse. I cleaned the office as if no one had been in it. I wiped the mouse and arranged the stapler at a deliberate angle and placed a plant leaf back over the spot where my elbow had pressed down. He arrived past 9 with the expensive cologne he wore when he wanted to smell like someone who wins. He kissed the top of my head like you pet a dog and asked if I had eaten. I said I had. He said he was thinking it might be healthy for us to take space for a few months. He said the Portland project would require his full attention, and that if I stayed busy here, I would not feel abandoned. He put a hand on the back of a chair and watched me as if I might perform in some acceptable way. I said he should do what he needed to do. He nodded and looked relieved as if he had passed a difficult exam. In bed, I lay still and counted breaths. He slept quickly when his mind was made up. I pictured the branch bank and the way Harper stacked documents in tidy piles. I pictured my new account number written in ink on the pad she had given me. I pictured my hand steady on a pen. The future does not come with a fanfare. It comes as a small list you intend to complete and the courage to complete the first item. The next morning, Harper called early. She said she had set up a secure folder for scans. She asked if I was ready to review the statements more closely. I made tea and opened the laptop. We looked together at the pattern. Paychecks arrived, joint funds transferred out. Company expenses surged in weeks that also showed personal purchases that did not belong to me. Airline charges, luxury hotel charges, a boutique women's clothing retailer in the Pearl District. Harper told me to photograph the screen with my phone and send the images to the folder because screen captures alone are too easy to argue with. I followed directions like a diligent client and felt a strange strength in obedience to my own best interest. Around noon, she paused and said, I am going to say something unromantic and you are going to listen. She said if Ethan intended to file for divorce from a position of financial strength, these transfers were his head start. She said I was not behind, I was awake, and that was different. She asked if I felt emotionally safe in the house until I found a place to go. I said yes. She said we should find that place quickly anyway, because logistics become dignity when you stop waiting for permission. I started looking at rental listings in Capitol Hill where the apartments are old and the light is generous. I made an appointment for the following day at a studio above a florist. The landlord responded quickly and said he could meet at 10. I printed the application and placed it alongside 3 references from old clients and a letter from Harper, vouching for the stability of my separate finances. Practicality felt like oxygen. That evening, Ethan brought home takeout and 2 bottles of wine and behaved like a man who believed in his own benevolence. He mentioned his travel again and said it would be good for both of us to recharge. I said I hoped his meetings went well. He looked at my new hair and said he still preferred the old length. I said I preferred the truth. He left early the next day. I showered and dressed and drove to Capitol Hill with the windows cracked for the smell of wet sidewalks. The studio was up 2 flights with a narrow hallway that opened into a room washed with north light. The floors were worn smooth by other people's lives. The window looked out at the florist below, where buckets of flowers leaned against each other like tired dancers. The landlord had kind eyes and a clipboard and the weary humor of a man who has heard many bright promises. I handed him my documents. He glanced at the letter from Harper, nodded at the references, and said the place was mine if I wanted it starting next week. I said I wanted it today. He hesitated, then called the cleaning crew and said he could have it ready by late afternoon. I thanked him with the kind of gratitude that makes you feel 10 pounds lighter. On the way back, I stopped at a supply store and bought packing tape, a stack of boxes, and a fat black marker. At home, I moved through rooms choosing what belonged to me. I took my laptop, my tablet with old sketches, my grandmother's quilt, the coffee mug with a small chip that my hand always found in the morning, and a stack of design books with dog-eared pages. I left the things that felt heavy with his expectation. In the closet, I slid garments along the metal rod and took the ones that fit my new hair and my old self. I wrapped framed photos of places I loved that had nothing to do with us. I wrapped the first sketch I ever loved, a pencil drawing of a small craftsman house my father had taught me to read the bones of when I was 12. I held that paper longer than the rest. It smelled faintly of graphite and youth. Harper arrived with her car and a look that made me feel like a person and not a problem. She helped carry boxes down the stairs. We worked quietly, passing each other in the hall, with the efficiency of movers who know what matters and what can be replaced. On one trip, she paused at the kitchen island, where the bowl of fruit looked composed and false. She asked if I wanted the cookbook my mother gave me. I said yes and slid it into a bag. She asked if I wanted the wedding album. I said no. Before we left, I walked through the house and touched the backs of chairs and the switch plates and the banister. Not to claim ownership, but to say goodbye to the version of myself who thought she needed permission to breathe. In the office, I deleted my user profile from the shared computer and wiped the browser history of searches that belonged to me. I left a single sticky note on the desk with a list of utilities and their due dates because someone should not lose hot water because of my clarity. Then I took it back up, folded it in half, and put it in my pocket. Courtesy had its limits now. At the studio, the cleaning crew had left the windows open, and the smell of lemon cleaner met the smell of flowers from below. Harper and I carried the boxes in and stacked them along the wall. She handed me a set of keys and said, "Try them." The deadbolt clicked with a sound that felt like a promise. She set a paper bag on the counter with a loaf of bread and a jar of jam and 2 apples. She is the kind of friend who feeds you in small, kind ways when the big things are not edible. We sat on the floor and ate slices of bread, and she asked if I wanted to talk about the receipt again. I said no. She asked if I wanted to talk about what I wanted to build next. I said yes. We sketched the outline of a name that felt like light, Lumiere Studio. I wrote it in block letters, and then in a softer hand, and circled the version that looked like it would look good on the corner of a project board. Harper smiled and said it sounded like a beginning. Later, when she left, I unpacked one box and then another. I put the books on the built-in shelf and leaned the sketch of the craftsman house against the wall where I could see it when I woke. I made the bed with the quilt and turned down one corner like my mother used to. I took a photo of the window with the florist below and saved it to a folder named Place I Choose. The light changed on the walls and made shallow pools that moved with the hour. My phone buzzed with a notification from an account I did not follow but could see because a mutual friend had shared it. A story from Sierra Blake at a bar I recognized by its tile and terrible music. In the gleam of a polished table, I saw the reflection of a watch I knew as well as my own wrist. I paused the story and studied the curve of metal and the way a second hand moved across a black face. I felt no shock, only a simple acknowledgement that people who hide forget that light is everywhere. I took a screenshot and sent it to the secure folder with a label that meant nothing to anyone but me. I made myself a cup of tea in a chipped mug and whispered thank you to no one in particular for evidence that did not require me to chase it. Ethan texted after 10, long day, meetings went well, back late next week. I typed, have a productive trip and sent it. The absence of fight in my response felt like a strong muscle I had not used in years. He sent back a thumbs up. I put the phone face down and looked at the room. It was small and kind. It did not have the view of the lake or the stone fireplace. It had a good floor and a window that told the truth. The next morning, I walked to a coffee shop around the corner and ordered something simple. I sat by the window with my legal pad and wrote Lumiere Studio at the top and made a list that began with logo concepts and ended with call Claire Benton if courage arrives. Courage did not arrive, but a steady willingness did. I sketched a few marks that might become a logo. Clean lines, a shape that suggested illumination without being literal. I remembered my father's hand steady on a straight edge, and the way he said that light knows where to go if you cut a path for it. By midday, I returned to the house with Harper to retrieve 3 more boxes and my sewing kit and the small toolbox I kept, even though Ethan said we could always hire someone for small repairs. In the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed, and a half-empty glass of red wine sat near the sink. Harper moved to gather a stack of mail and paused. Her eyes flicked over an alert in bold print from the bank. She handed it to me without comment. It showed a transfer out of the joint account for an amount that made my stomach tilt. The recipient account name matched Ward Urban Developments. The timing was immediate after a deposit. Harper's jaw tightened. She said this is the kind of pattern that makes judges frown. She said we would not speak of it to him. She said we would continue to document. We loaded the last box into her trunk. Before I shut the front door, I stood in the entry and took one breath. The house smelled like the citrus cleaner the housekeeper used twice a week and a hint of the cologne Ethan wore when he was selling a story. It no longer smelled like a life. I turned the latch and did not look back through the side light. At the studio, I stacked the boxes and wrote a label on each with the fat black marker. Books, tools, textiles, photos to review. I opened my laptop and designed 3 simple logo drafts with my old software and saved them to a folder named First Tries. The mark that felt right was a small square split by a line into light and shade. It reminded me that contrast makes shape visible. Evening gathered in the corners. I turned on the lamp and watched the warm circle it made on the floor. I brushed my new hair behind my ears and stood at the window and looked down at the florist. He was closing up, tucking the last buckets into the cooler. He flipped the sign and locked the door and gave himself a small nod I could see even from up here. I nodded back, though he could not see me. Some days, the only witness you need is yourself. I turned off the lamp. I locked the door. I stood with my hand on the knob for a moment longer than necessary and let the quiet settle. I was not running. I had moved into a space I chose. I placed my legal pad on the nightstand and lay down on the quilt. The city made soft noises outside. Somewhere a couple argued, and somewhere a baby laughed, and somewhere a delivery truck hissed at a stop. My life felt small and sharp and mine. Tomorrow I would call the utility companies and change the addresses and order business cards that said my name next to Lumiere Studio. Tonight I would sleep in a room that did not ask me to make myself smaller. Before my eyes closed, I said a final thing to the ceiling in a voice only I could hear. Silence is not surrender. It is a room with the door closed where you can finally plan your escape without announcing it to the hallway. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3, Rebuilding from the Ruins. January turned the air thin and bright, and the studio felt like a small ship that I was learning to steer. The room above the florist kept a gentle chill even with the radiator knocking at the baseboards. I taped butcher paper on one wall and drew boxes for projects I hoped would exist. I wrote Lumiere Studio at the top in a hand that looked steadier than I felt. My bank balance was careful. My calendar was ambitious. Every day I unlocked the door and told the empty room that I meant it. Money hummed in the background like a refrigerator. Rent was due on the 1st. The landlord downstairs gave me a discount if I agreed to freshen his shop layout for Valentine's week. I sketched simple shelves and a narrow counter that would force customers to move deeper into the store. He said he trusted me. I said I would trade a portion of my fee for 2 months of reduced rent. He laughed and said I bargained like a person who wanted to stay. Harper came by with a canvas tote full of forms and a patient face. We sat at my thrifted table beneath the window and worked through contracts until the daylight tilted. She clarified scope of work change orders, payment schedules with retainers that protected me, and intellectual property clauses that said my concepts remained mine until paid in full. She underlined language I would need if anyone tried to republish my drawings without permission. She added a paragraph that said I could photograph completed projects for portfolio use unless a client opted out in writing. I signed my own templates and felt official. In the afternoons, I walked to meet tiny clients with specific dreams. A baker who wanted her counter moved 3 feet to the left so a stroller could finally get through without catching on a trash can. A couple who had argued for years about a wall that cut their kitchen in half. A retired teacher with a small inheritance and a larger fear of making a mistake. I listened and measured and spoke plainly. I priced fairly and not foolishly. When a client tried to steer me into free work for exposure, I smiled and declined. Exposure is a cold wind. Rent needs currency. Claire Benton from Modern Spaces had seen photos of the florist update on a neighborhood blog and sent a short email with more kindness than exclamation points. She said she admired restraint and asked if she could stop by to see my process. She arrived in a camel coat with a notebook that had no lines. We walked down to the florist first. She asked the right questions. How did you decide the shelf heights? Why this bend in the path? I told her I wanted the space to lead the eye and the foot without announcing itself as clever. Back upstairs, she looked at my wall of butcher paper and said she liked how I treated ideas as if they deserved oxygen. 2 days later, she sent a contact for a photographer named Noah Rivera. She wrote that he had a patient eye and believed in the way light makes honesty attractive. Noah showed up with a camera bag and a quiet hello, and the attention of someone who knew how to stand in a room without claiming it. He shot the florist after closing and asked if we could return at dawn for a second set because the windows would forgive him then. We did. He did not tell me to tilt my head or hold the tape measure on a diagonal or put my hand on my hip. He captured the work and let me be part of the frame because the work included my body reaching to do it. Your lines are calm, he said, looking at his screen while we stood among buckets of lilies. They are just lines, I said. No, he answered. They hold. He delivered an edited set within a week. The images felt like a promise I had not dared to make to myself. Claire asked permission to pitch a small feature on new studios subject to editorial approval. I said yes. Then I closed my laptop and swept the floor because pride is useful in measured doses and dust always returns. The email about Riverside Exchange arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was thin and my resolve felt stretchable. An open request for qualifications for a phased redesign of a historic warehouse near the river in Portland. The project would include seismic retrofits, a lobby rethink, and a ground floor market hall. The developer listed at the bottom was Ward Urban Developments. I read the line twice, and then I read it again. My hand did not shake. I downloaded the packet and printed it on my thin printer that fanned the paper as if struggling to believe. I sat and made a list. I would apply under Lumiere Studio and under the structure Harper had helped me build. I would meet the deadline and follow instructions to the letter. I would not write my married name anywhere. I would not write his name anywhere. I would let the work stand where my face used to. I gathered what the packet required. A statement of approach, relevant experience, projected team insurance proof, and financial stability documentation. Relevant experience looked small on paper. I had leadership from my past life and my unseen contributions to other firms, but my current company was new and my name was not in print. I made peace with that. I wrote with clarity about my philosophy for old buildings. Preserve what tells the story. Intervene where safety and flow demand it. Illuminate material truths. I invited a structural engineer I had known at Harper & Co. to be part of my team on paper if the scope advanced. He agreed in a short call and said he had time for good work. Claire offered a letter about process and accountability. The florist wrote 2 sentences from his heart that read better than any marketing copy could. Noah attached a folder labeled Portfolio that made my eyes sting. We submitted on a Thursday night with a breath held that I pretended was composure. I slept. I woke. I did 3 site visits to spaces that smelled like dust and possibility. For 2 weeks, I refused to think about the warehouse. Then an email arrived with a polite decline. Thank you for your interest. At this time, we are unable to advance your firm due to a lack of financial guarantor. I placed my forehead on the cool table and let the quiet do its work for a minute. Then I called Harper. They want a guarantor, I said. Of course they do, she replied. They want reassurance without doing the work of looking closely. I cannot conjure a bigger bank account, I said. You do not need to, she answered. You need to show them how you lower risk. We will build a plan that reads like competence. We will provide references that speak to delivery and schedule. We will demonstrate phased invoicing that keeps exposure minimal. Ask for reconsideration. You are not asking for a favor. You are asking them to consider facts. We spent the weekend building a risk plan with more bones than adjectives. I outlined a phase-by-phase approach with clear milestones and hold points. I wrote a budget narrative that explained where costs hide and where they cannot. I offered a pilot package for the lobby, only with an option for an early termination if benchmarks were not met. I showed cash flow that made sense for a modest studio that knows how to hire the right help. The structural engineer added a page about retrofit sequencing that would keep the building usable for tenants during most of the work. Claire wrote a note about transparency and communication and said work speaks when the path is clear. Noah delivered 2 more sets of photos from small projects I had completed that month, each showing a space becoming itself. On Monday morning, I sent a concise letter to the selection committee asking for reconsideration in light of new documentation acknowledging their need for financial confidence and providing a non-binding letter from a small community bank willing to issue a modest line once a contract was signed. Harper read my letter out loud and said it sounded like someone who believed in her own signatures. They responded 2 days later and asked for a virtual meeting. On the call, the project manager opened with questions that sounded like they had been rehearsed on other firms. I answered with specifics. I did not try to sound bigger than I was. I tried to sound exactly like a person who finishes what she starts. At the end, the manager said they would update the shortlist and let me know by the end of the week. I thanked them and turned off my camera and sat in the quiet with my hands flat on the table until my heartbeat steadied. On Friday, an email arrived with the subject line, Shortlist Update. Lumiere Studio was invited to a second interview with a design board the following month. The message included a list of panelists by title: City Representative, Tenant Representative, Community Liaison, Developer Representative. The developer slot belonged to Ward Urban Developments. No name was listed. My mouth went dry and then calm. It could be anyone. It could be him. I stood and opened the window and let the city in. The florist laughed with a customer below. A bus sighed at the stop. My heart bent but did not break. I told Harper first. She said we would prepare for whoever sat at that table. She reviewed my presentation deck and stripped out decorative words until only the structure remained. She added a slide about insurance and a slide about change management that translated the legal parts into human sequences. She wrote a 1-paragraph summary I could say without looking down. She asked if I wanted her to sit in the back of the room during the interview as my attorney, or if I wanted her at a distance so I would have to hold my own. I chose the back row. Courage is contagious. Noah came by with a modest box of printed boards. He had framed the florist shots in a little kitchen I had finished on a tight budget, and the before and after of a cracked stair I had reinforced with a steel plate hidden under new oak treads. He said the boards looked like work and not show, which was meant as a compliment. We ran the route to the elevator and back until I could stack and unstack everything without dropping a single clip. Do you want to rehearse answers? He asked. I want to rehearse listening, I said. He smiled. You can do both. Claire called that night just to ask how I was sleeping. I told her the truth, lightly. She said nerves kept the edges sharp and not to dull them entirely. She asked for permission to mention Lumiere Studio in a roundup of emerging firms if the editor approved. I said yes, and then I turned my phone off so I could hear my own thoughts. In the days that followed, I worked on 3 small projects while the interview waited like a closed door I would eventually open. The florist holiday display turned into a simple grid of branches that made red roses look like punctuation instead of a shout. The retired teacher cried when I took down the kitchen wall. She cried because the sun reached her table for the first time in 15 years. I cried later in my car because sometimes success is just light landing where it should. The morning of the interview, I woke before my alarm and ironed a white shirt that fit my new life. I packed a small bag with backup cords and mints and a bottle of water that I promised myself I would sip. Harper texted that she was already at the building and that there was a good bench in the lobby where I could breathe. I walked into the mirror and met my own eyes and said one sentence: let the work speak. The selection room in Portland had a long table and the institutional carpet of meetings. The panelists filed in with an assortment of notepads and stoic expressions. I set my boards along the wall in the order of the story I needed them to tell. The door opened again, and the developer representative entered. Ethan wore a navy suit that I had picked out 2 years earlier and a new tie that tried too hard. He froze for a fraction of a second and then recovered and took his seat without saying my name. No one else in the room seemed to notice the way the air had changed. Harper made brief eye contact from the back row. Her face did not move, but her shoulders settled like a dancer finding center. I clicked to the first slide and began with history and load paths and market circulation. I did not look at Ethan during the opening. I looked at the building and the people who would use it and the path that would carry them. When questions came, I answered them cleanly. When a panelist asked about contingency and cost escalation, I described a schedule buffer and a materials hedge that did not promise what inflation would not keep. When someone asked how I would stage work to allow tenants to remain, I outlined a sequence that pulled the lobby apart in thirds so no one lost access completely, and a signage plan that added grace to inconvenience. Finally, the developer representative asked a question about procurement that held a familiar cadence. It was the voice I knew from kitchens and car rides and hotel lobbies. I answered without inserting history into the grammar. He kept his eyes neutral. I felt the old pull to perform the version of myself he preferred and watched that impulse walk out of the room. When it ended, the chair thanked me and said decisions would be communicated within 2 weeks. I packed my boards and nodded to the panel and left without looking back at Ethan. In the hallway, Harper let out a breath she must have been holding for the full hour. "You did not flinch," she said. "I heard the building more than I heard him," I said. On the train home, I opened my notebook and sketched the lobby again from memory. I drew the market stalls against brick that would stay visible. I drew the stair that would finally feel like an invitation and not a dare. I drew a small lamp in a forgotten corner that would make a tired person feel considered. I closed the book and looked out at the river, moving in a color that felt like steel and mercy. Back at the studio, I set the boards against the wall and took out the tiny model I had carved from foam the night before, only to see the proportions one more time. The form was simple and honest. I placed my finger along the path I had drawn and followed it from door to door. The radiator clicked. The flower shop below turned its sign to closed. I lowered my voice and spoke to the room because the room had stayed with me when I had nothing but a list and a lock. "You said I could not stand on my own," I whispered, not to a person, but to an old belief that had been paying rent in my head. "Then watch. If this story touched you, please subscribe, and let someone out there feel less alone." Thank you. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. June in Portland carried heat like a low drum, steady and close. The conference center near the river smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. I arrived early with my boards and a laptop that had been charged twice for luck. Harper texted that she was 2 blocks away. I stood in the corridor and listened to the room next door where another team was practicing introductions. Their voices rose and fell in a rhythm I recognized from every selection meeting I had ever watched. The rhythm of people trying to be chosen. Our slot was mid-morning. I set the boards on the ledge of a window and wiped invisible dust from a corner. When the door opened and the coordinator called my name, I walked in with my hands steady and my mouth ready for complete sentences. Panelists sat in a line facing the screen. Name placards waited like small flags. City representative, tenant representative, community liaison, developer representative. The last chair was empty. I placed the first board on the easel and looked at the faces that would decide more than a contract. The developer chair scraped lightly as someone pulled it back. Ethan walked in wearing a suit that tried to read as modest. He did not look at me until he had taken his seat and aligned a pen with the edge of a legal pad. Then his eyes found mine and flickered through surprise into neutrality. The room did not shift, only the temperature inside my skin. I began with the building, brick that had carried freight and heat and stories, a lobby that had lost its purpose, stairs that punished the knees. I explained a phased plan that would allow tenants to keep working while we made the circulation honest. I talked through a timeline that gave tradesmen room to breathe and a budget narrative that acknowledged inflation instead of pretending it would leave us alone. I clicked through slides and used the boards to put weight on the ideas that needed gravity. Questions came. The city representative asked how we would manage seismic upgrades without scarring the interior. I outlined a brace strategy that would hide in plain sight. The tenant representative wanted to know about signage and wayfinding during construction. I described a language of signs that would feel more like permission than warning. The community liaison asked about accessibility beyond code. I talked about handrails that welcomed small hands and older ones without broadcasting pity. When it was the developer's turn, Ethan adjusted the pen again. His voice offered a neutral query about procurement. He asked if I had suppliers who could commit to delivery windows that matched our schedule. I answered with names and lead times and contingencies and kept my eyes on the panelist who would place the order, not the one who wanted to order me. He asked a follow-up about insurance coverage limits. I answered with the exact numbers on my policy and the binder my broker would issue on award. He nodded as if checking a box in a test he had written. When the hour closed, the chair thanked me. I gathered my boards and clicked my laptop shut. My hands did not shake. In the hallway, Harper was a calm shape against the wall. "You tracked the room like a metronome," she said softly. "I heard the building," I said. We reached the elevator before I felt him behind us. He cleared his throat in the manner of men who assume corridors will accommodate them. "Lauren," he said. Harper turned her face a polite mask. "I need a moment with my wife," he said. "Explanations require clarity," Harper replied. "This hallway is fine." He looked at her, then at me, then at the ceiling as if it would instruct him. He stepped closer. His cologne was the same, a citrus top note over something sharp. "You have changed," he said. "No," I said. "I stopped living to fit inside your shadow." His mouth tightened. He pushed a hand through his hair and exhaled. "Look," he said, "there is no point pretending we are not connected. What happened between us was complicated. I have been thinking about what we were before it all got messy. Maybe we could start again. Slow, careful." "You want to start over because you are afraid of losing face," I said. He opened his palms as if that gesture still worked. It did not. "Lunch," he said. "Just to talk." "Your timing is meticulous when your pride is at risk," I said. We were interrupted by the coordinator asking for my badge. I returned it and nodded thanks. Harper touched my elbow and we moved toward the exit. Ethan called after me. "Nice deck," he said. "Thank you," I said without turning. In the car, Harper watched my profile for signs of a crack. "You did not falter," she said. "I am tired," I said, "but it is a clean tired." By late afternoon, we were back in Seattle. The studio felt like the inside of a deep breath. I laid the boards along the wall and wrote notes about the questions I would have answered even better. At dusk, my phone lit with Harper's name again. Her voice changed shape when she had information. It became precise. "I received a packet from a contact who owes me a favor," she said. "Expense summaries from Ward Urban for the last quarter. Travel and hospitality coded as client development. We have receipts that match dates Sierra posted publicly. 2 first-class tickets to Maui during a week labeled Portland Review. Jewelry purchases at a luxury boutique flagged as donor outreach. This is a pattern. If funds came from the project budget or the investor pool, it is a problem." "Are we sure?" I said. "We will not use the word sure until a federal officer does," she said. "But we have enough to ask questions. We need you to do a narrow thing. Go to the bank tomorrow. Ask for notarized copies of joint account statements for the months that correspond to the transfers we flagged. Sign a declaration that you have legal access as a joint holder. I will meet you there and witness. We keep our hands clean." "Is this revenge?" I asked. "This is record keeping," she said. "What happens after is not ours to stage." The bank lobby smelled like paper and that clean cold of industrial air. The notary checked my identification and watched my signature with ceremonial attention. I asked for certified copies of the relevant months. The banker printed them and stamped them and slid them through the slot with a neutral smile. Harper placed the packet in a new envelope and sealed it with a firm palm. She wrote a case reference number on the outside. "We are going to package what we have and submit through the formal portal for financial crimes," she said. "Detective Sanders handles corporate misuse cases. We will not write adjectives. We will write dates and amounts and sources. We will include screen captures of public posts to establish context. We will include your declaration that you did not access any private account that did not include your name." We returned to the studio and sat at the table. Harper's laptop glowed steady. She typed a cover letter that could pass any audit. She attached the bank documents and the hotel receipts and the jewelry invoices and the screenshots of Sierra's images that included the reflection of a watch and the corner of a boarding pass. She attached Ethan's public calendar announcing he would be in Portland those same days. She attached a short memo from my structural engineer friend confirming the investor meeting schedule, which did not include a Maui trip. She added a sworn statement from me about the receipt found in the jacket pocket and the phone preview I had not opened. She did not embellish. She called the federal office and asked for Detective Sanders by name. A receptionist transferred her. A calm voice answered and gave us a reference number and an upload link. Harper sent the packet and watched the progress bar crawl. When it hit complete, she leaned back. "We wait," she said. "We do not gossip. We do not post. If asked, we say we cooperated with authorities. That is all." For 2 days, I cut foam and sketched and took calls about a small cafe that wanted to add a bench near its window. I did what work asks when life stretches thin. On the third morning, an email from an investigator arrived requesting a brief interview. Harper joined on speaker from her office. Detective Sanders's voice was patient and dry. He asked basic questions first: my full name and address, my relationship to Ward Urban, whether I had an ongoing dispute that might color my report. "I am separated," I said. "I have an interest in seeing facts handled by the correct channels. I do not have an interest in harming anyone outside the scope of those facts." He asked where documents were obtained. I explained the joint account. He asked if I had accessed any personal accounts that were not shared. I said no. He asked if I had entered any passcodes to view private messages or emails. I said no. He asked if I could identify Sierra Blake from the public images. I said yes. He asked if I had additional evidence not included in the packet. I said not at this time. He thanked me for my clarity and ended the call with the quiet of a person who has seen worse than this. Harper exhaled. "That was clean," she said. "Now we do nothing. If opposing counsel contacts you, refer them to me." By evening, a press alert began to move through the industry. Not a headline, just a whisper in a trade newsletter about inquiries into travel expenses at a mid-sized developer in Seattle with interests in Portland. The next morning, the whisper was a sentence on a real estate site. By night, it became a statement from Ward Urban that the company was cooperating with a routine review and that leadership remained confident in their practices. I read the paragraph and felt the familiar urge to refresh. I closed the screen instead and washed dishes. The plate made a squeak that sounded like relief. 2 days later, the board at Ward Urban placed Ethan on administrative leave pending the outcome of the inquiry. The company announced an interim leader from finance. The statement included language about standards and transparency. The words were the same ones he used to throw at me when I asked why honesty hurt so much in our home. Harper forwarded the release with a single line: "Do not respond." I walked to the studio with a gallon of warm white and a roller. The wall opposite the window had borne scuffs from boards and tape and a summer of my nervous hands. I moved the table and laid a drop cloth and stirred the paint with careful circles. The first stroke left a clean track across last month's fingerprints. The second stroke met the first and smoothed the seam between them. The room smelled like the start of something that did not need to be named. My phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text arrived from Ethan. "We need to talk." I stood with the roller dripping gently inside the tray and felt the weight of 2 words. I took a slow breath and set the roller down and wiped the handle with a rag. "I do not owe you a conversation," I said to the air. I sent a reply that contained 1 sentence. "Please contact my attorney, Harper Lynn." No more text followed. When the last square of wall took paint, the light in late afternoon slid across it like a hand learning a new surface. The color was not loud. It did not need to be. I cleaned the tray in the deep sink and propped the roller on the ledge to dry. I opened the window, and the flower shop sent up a sweet, wet breeze. I stood back and looked at the room that had carried me and thought about truth sitting where it belongs. I moved a chair into the corner and sat with my palms on my knees. Somewhere in the city, a newsroom wrote copy. Somewhere in an office, a board member practiced concern. Somewhere, a man who once called himself my anchor rehearsed a speech about misunderstanding. I did not rehearse anything. I listened to the radiator tick as it cooled and the faint sound of a train crossing a bridge. I let calm find its own path. Truth does not require a microphone. It requires placement. I had placed mine where the right hands could find it. The rest was not mine to conduct. The room settled. The paint dried to a soft sheen. The wall matched the light instead of fighting it. I stood and touched the surface with the back of my hand. It felt like a page even and ready. I leaned the smallest board against it and watched its shadow find the floor. Then I turned off the lamp and let the late sun do the work. It was not white. It was the color of freedom. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Found Herself. May arrived with a clear sky and the kind of light that makes everything honest. The studio walls had cured to a soft sheen, and the invite from Modern Spaces lay on my table like a small, steady heartbeat. The issue would be released with a reception at a gallery in Pioneer Square. My name sat under a headline that called me Designer of Renewal. I read it once in the morning and once again in the afternoon, not to convince myself it was real, but to thank the version of me who had kept walking when it was easier to sit down. The day of the event, I ironed a simple dress and pinned my hair back without ceremony. Harper texted that she and Noah were already outside and that my father was on his way, moving at the deliberate pace of a man who refuses to rush through pride. I arrived to a room washed in warm light. The gallery had tall brick walls and a floor that creaked in the places where stories like to gather. People moved slowly the way they do when they want to be seen considering beauty. Claire met me at the door with a smile that reached her eyes. She placed the magazine in my hands. The cover smelled like ink and new beginnings. Inside, the layout had room to breathe. Photos that Noah had taken were printed without fear of white space. Lines of text sat in tidy corridors between images explaining process and restraint without selling them like miracles. I traced the caption under a photo of the florist, the one where morning light stretched across the work table, and let gratitude settle where anxiety used to live. Backstage felt like the quiet side of a theater. Folding chairs, a table with water bottles, and a single plate of grapes, a printout of the program with names and times. I stood near a window and scrolled my phone out of habit. A headline caught me with the clean finality of a door closing. Ward Urban Developments officially dissolved after federal investigation. The words were not triumphant. They were factual, cool, inevitable. My chest did not lift in victory. It softened. I read the first paragraph. The board had cooperated, assets had been handled according to law, leadership had been removed months earlier, and the company was closing after a settlement with regulators. There were no dramatic details, no adjectives that make readers lean forward. Only the line that said the end had come because it was the correct place for it to stop. I set the phone down. Mason walked in as if he knew I needed a familiar weight beside me. He wore the jacket I remembered from Sunday meetings over graph paper. He looked at my face and did not ask the wrong question. He simply took my hand and said that he always knew light would find me if I stopped hiding it. I told him that I had learned to cut a path for it, and he nodded the way he did when a line finally landed straight. Harper appeared with her calm that never tried to steal attention. She asked how my breathing was. I said even. She said the editor would speak first, then I would say a few words, and then stand near the photos while people asked questions about materials and budget and the way I thought about old walls. Noah stood a little behind her camera at rest, ready to catch something unscripted. He asked if I wanted to rehearse a smile or let it happen. I said I would let it find me if it wanted to. The editor called my name and the room answered with kind applause. I walked to the small platform and stood where the tape on the floor suggested. I spoke about renewal as a discipline rather than a mood. I said that saving a building was not about nostalgia, it was about dignity. I said that old spaces could carry new lives if we listened for their load and their story. I thanked the people who had handed me small jobs when my invoices looked like hope. I thanked the crew who had moved walls without breaking spirits. I thanked a city that forgives and remembers in equal measure. When I finished, the applause felt like a warm towel after cold rain, not flashy, necessary. During the questions, a woman asked how I balanced ambition with constraint. I said that limits are not enemies, they are edges that give shape to courage. A man asked about fees and fairness. I said that paying people on time is not generosity, it is basic decency. Someone asked what I would say to the version of myself who left a safe job to sit in a room above a florist with only a sketch and a stubborn heart. I said I would tell her that silence can be power if you fill it with work. After the formal part ended, I stood near the prince and answered practical questions about finish durability and schedule sequencing. Harper stayed within sight, not hovering just there. Noah circled quietly and caught angles I did not feel. I saw my father talking with a young designer who looked like Hope in a black jacket. He gestured with his hands as if drawing a beam in the air. I loved him for still teaching without a classroom. The crowd bent and thinned, swelled and ebbed. I was studying a photo of the stair detail when I felt a presence I knew too well. Ethan stood a few feet away, smaller than I remembered and somehow older than the calendar allowed. He wore a shirt that had lost its arrogance and a face that had misplaced its ease. He did not speak right away. He waited until I turned toward him and kept his hands at his sides like a man following new rules. He said that I had truly found someone better. He tried to make it a compliment, but there was a bruise under the words. I told him that he was right only halfway, that I had found myself. The sentence released itself like an exhale I had stored for years. He nodded and looked at the floor. He said he wanted me to know he understood some things now. He said that understanding came late. He said he did not expect anything from me. I told him that nothing was the correct expectation. Silence sat between us, but it was not hostile. It was a neutral space where facts could rest. He looked at the photo of the lobby and said he remembered the way I used to talk about light, as if it were a material. He said he had not heard me for a long time. I said that I had stopped speaking loudly because I was busy learning to speak clearly. He said that he hoped the future was kind to me. I said that kindness was a choice I was finally making for myself. He stepped back, almost relieved to be dismissed without cruelty. He disappeared into the slow tide of the room. My body did not tremble. My heart did not rehearse a speech it would regret. I felt only the simple relief of a chapter closing without the tear of a ripped page. Evelyn approached not long after her steps, careful, her eyes measured. She had always dressed like gentility as proof of goodness. Tonight she looked like a woman who had studied the distance between those two things. She asked if we could speak privately. I moved with her to a quieter corner where a tall plant had been placed to pretend it was hiding us. She reached into her bag and withdrew a velvet box. Inside lay a thin gold band with a small stone that had belonged to her mother. She said it had been part of a gift at our wedding and that she had taken it back when she believed the story she preferred. She said it should never have been removed from my hand by anyone but me. She said that if I did not want it, she would understand, but she wanted to correct what she could. I looked at the ring without reaching for it. I told her that we all cling to illusions when they make us feel safe. I told her I had simply woken up earlier than the rest of the room. I closed the box and placed it back in her palm and asked her to keep it as a reminder that promises matter not because they always last, but because they tell us who we intend to be when we make them. She closed her fingers over the box and nodded with the humility of someone meeting her own lesson. Noah found me as the evening thinned to a rhythm of coats and goodbyes. He asked if I could step into the doorway for one photo, nothing staged, just a witness to a moment. I stood where brick met frame and looked out at the street. The air held that quiet after a crowd leaves and before the city remembers it is loud. He lifted the camera and waited not for a pose, but for honesty. Something in my chest relaxed. I did not force a smile. It arrived anyway. He clicked once and lowered the camera without checking the screen. He said that light had chosen me. I laughed and told him that Harper would accuse him of stealing her line. Harper joined us, hand on my shoulder, eyes soft. She teased that the light finally belonged to me, and I told her that she had made sure the path was cut when I could not hold the blade steady. She said that I had done the cutting. She said that law can open doors, but only work keeps them open. She said my father was looking for me because he liked the cake and wanted permission to eat 2 pieces. We found Mason near the dessert table where he pretended to debate between lemon and chocolate. He chose both and grinned like a child. He told me quietly that he had kept my drawing of the craftsman house on his work table for weeks and that he touched it every morning like a ritual for steady hands. I told him that I had learned the truest lines from him. We stood together and watched the last guests slip into the night. The gallery grew quiet, leaving only staff stacking chairs and the soft slide of paintings settling against walls. I went back to the prints one more time, not to check for flaws, but to memorize the feeling of standing in a room that did not require me to shrink. The photos looked back without asking for permission. They looked like work that could continue without applause. I touched the edge of one frame and thanked it for surviving the days when I thought my voice had to be loud to be heard. When we stepped outside, the air carried a coolness that felt like a hand on a fevered brow. Harper hugged me and said she would text in the morning and that I should sleep while pride is still warm. Noah promised to send the single frame he had taken, and that if I did not like it, he would delete it without a second thought. My father squeezed my hand and said he would drive home slow so the night would not end too quickly. I watched them go and then stood alone on the sidewalk looking up at the windows where the event had been. They glowed like squares of quiet permission. Back at my studio, the room met me with the soft breath of paint and paper. The lamp made its small circle, and the city made its small sounds. I set the magazine on the table and opened to the page with my name. I traced it once and closed the cover. I set the velvet box Evelyn had tried to give me on the shelf, empty, a reminder that I did not need objects to validate closure. I took off my shoes and felt the floor with bare feet. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the day fall off me in careful pieces. No rage, no performance, only a clean line drawn from what I had been to who I had become. People will tell you that the best revenge is living well. I think the best revenge is becoming whole. No public spectacle can replace the quiet of a person who knows her own weight and does not apologize for it. No victory is louder than walking into a room you earned without needing to prove the pain that got you there. No ending is more complete than releasing the version of yourself who waited for someone else to measure your worth. If someone ever told you that you would never find anything better, let them be half right and half forgotten. Prove them correct only in the part that belongs to you. Find yourself. Build the parts that were ignored. Stand in the light you cut for your own life. When you share your story, do it with proof, not rage, so the next person can follow the map without burning in the fire that made it. I looked around the studio and saw nothing that did not belong to me. The boards leaned where I had left them. The wall held the color precisely. The window made a rectangle on the floor where morning would sit when it arrived. I lay back and watched the ceiling move with the breathing of the city. I did not need anyone better. I only needed to return to the person I had hidden and invite her to stay.